A Big Ten SEC scheduling agreement, what would it look like?
Realignment, expansion, and scheduling agreements are always in the news. So we're back on the big mountain to break it down for you.
Hey, welcome back to the Big Mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve. And Steve wants to talk about a potential scheduling agreement here between the Big Ten and SEC. Lots of speculation, lots of news about this on the socials. And I think you want to maybe have a little fun with this. Yeah. So let's lay out what you're planning here.
Well, so first of all, kind of to take a few steps back of where this kind of got started. JY, if you remember, we did an episode, I don't know, about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, when I was starting to get some information from Big Ten sources in the lead up to that meeting between Big Ten ADs, SEC ADs,
yep,
where they wanted to kind of just talk about big things like, agreeing on 8 or 9 games and having both conferences the same, agreeing on a strategy for the CFP. And also one of the things they wanted to talk about was a scheduling alliance between the SEC and the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And, the conferences wanted the ADs to talk about that, talk about the logistics of it. How would you set it up? How would you pick the games?
Mm-hmm.
Would they be random? Would you try and match like 1 versus 1? Those kind of things. What about, are there any historical rivalries? All those kind of things. So that really got me thinking with this. I wanted to do this episode so some of this is based on actual, some of the information that I've gotten from my Big Ten sources.
Yeah.
And some of it is just, conjecture, just having fun,
sure,
taking some seeds they planted in my mind and just kind of going further with it. So the way I look at this is some sort of a Big Ten SEC challenge.
Okay.
I think it would likely be held on 1 week, probably Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
That may require them moving the calendar, shifting it up. It's something that's in the works. There seems to be a consensus that they would want to do this early in the season before they got into conference schedule.
Sure.
Labor Day weekend just kind of seems to work, and I think both conferences are interested in doing something big for Labor Day weekend to really take advantage of that weekend before the NFL really gets going.
Right, yeah.
So we're going to call this, just for fun, the Big Ten SEC Challenge, and just assume it would be Labor Day weekend. Now, one thing I did also with this, as part of the have a little bit of fun, a little bit of conjecture, is I wanted there to be an equal number of teams.
Sure.
So I've added to the big, I'm not going to say yet.
Okay.
All
right,
it's going to be surprises.
Hold it in suspense.
Yes. I've added teams to both the Big Ten and the SEC, teams that I think are the most likely to end up at those places.
Okay.
Or more likely than others. And added them to the mix for this scheduling agreement.
So are you going with 20 per? So 10 games here, or are you not going to tell us how many games?
I will divulge that, yes.
Okay,
20,
all right.
20 teams each.
Okay, all right.
So that would be the Big Ten adding 2 teams,
right,
and the SEC adding 4,
okay,
so where they'd have 20, so 10 games.
So we're getting 20 teams per conference,
yep,
right? 20 versus 20.
Yes.
So it'd be 20 games.
Right, 20.
I don't know why I said 10.
Oh, yeah, 20.
Yeah, 20 and 20.
20 versus, 20 and 20.
Yeah. All right, so you're going to add 6. So another fun little piece that we're going to add to this. Now, do you believe, before we get into this, I got 2 quick questions.
Yeah.
A lot of news coming out. The SEC may be close to going to 9 games, where the Big Ten is today. And also, do you believe this type of arrangement, again, not what you're going to go through here, but in order to have 9 conference games per conference and this ACC Big Ten Challenge game, which is 10 games of their slate.
Yes.
Do you believe that is fully contingent upon getting the AQs to 4-4, because it's, they're going to have, 9 in-conference games plus an straight up SEC game.
Yes.
So you've got at least 10 power games on your schedule. And the reason for the 4 AQs, I think ultimately is so that they're protecting themselves a little bit, but we still get these matchups. Do you think it's contingent upon that?
I don't know if it's contingent, but I think that's the way they would like to see it.
Okay.
I think they want to do it either way because it's a chance at a revenue.
Yes.
But that is a big reason why they're pushing for those 4 AQs, is to protect themselves.
Right.
Because if you're the SEC, you're talking about going to 9 games from 8. You already feel like you have a really hard schedule. Now you're going to go to 9 games, and you're going to play a 10th game against a Big Ten power.
Yeah.
You want to protect yourself So I don't know if it's contingent, but I think both kind of go hand in hand.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into some fun. We're going to go game by game here. The SEC
Big Ten
Big
Challenge.
Ten Challenge. Who are we going first?
All right, so first game right out of the gate, classic matchup here. These teams have played each other, I think, over 100 times before, in history. Nebraska and Oklahoma. I mean, how can you not have this matchup?
Yes.
And this would be year one. I'm basing this off of year one, where some of these matchups can change, but I have a feeling they would want to keep this going.
Yep.
Just the history and the tradition of these two schools, these two programs, back to their Big 8 days, and maybe before that.
Right.
So Nebraska, Oklahoma, just makes so much sense.
Yeah, that would be an awesome game to possibly protect the tradition in some way. Everyone is, focused on how we're getting away from some of these rivalries and these traditions with this new realignment. Maybe this is a way we're able to reconnect some of these old traditions and historical rivalries.
Absolutely, and that was kind of what's on my mind. And I think you'll see that will repeat itself a few times, because there's an opportunity with this to create some big matchups we haven't seen, but also kind of protect some of those historic rivalries.
Okay.
So my next one is something I think should be a historic rivalry: the Battle of the SCs. Both of these they call themselves USC, and they get mad and say that's we're the real USC.
Right.
So the USC Trojans and the University of South Carolina Gamecocks. My second matchup, and this could just be a 1-year fun matchup,
right.
Or they may decide this is something to keep going every year. The Battle of the USCs. I think it would be a fun matchup. It's cool. It would get people interested. Both fan bases already kind of have a dislike of each other,
sure,
because they look at them as the imposters, even though I don't really think they've played each other that much over the years.
Right. Well, and you get that East-West. I mean, there's a lot there
Yep.
that you can play that game off of.
Absolutely.
The USCs versus the East-West versus all kinds of different stuff. So
Yep.
that's a unique game that you could potentially have there.
Yep. So, okay, rolling into our third game. This is really interesting. I have UCLA Bruins matched up with the North Carolina Tar Heels. Two classic schools, classic brands, beautiful logos, that the powder blue, the baby blue, whatever you want to call each. And they are historic basketball schools, historic basketball powers,
sure,
that have come on to, one of them already joining the Big Ten, one of them as a, the big future potential target of the SEC. Just two huge, massive brands, massive history. I think that their fan bases would love this matchup, again, because they're two classic basketball schools.
Right.
And even though, this is going to be this is a football matchup, it's a football driven partnership, but I think you can create interest due to those basketball brands and them wanting to beat each other and knock each other off.
Well, you have your North Carolina blue or Carolina blue versus your baby blue or your Bruin blue. And your first, maybe not too much of a surprise. We've talked about UNC to the SEC, being a good fit. The timeline of that we'll have to wait and see on. But, your first, you mentioned some new blood in some of the conferences. So here's number one. UNC is part of the SEC, because obviously UCLA is part of the Big Ten right now. And that's another one where you can, of course, East versus West type of deal, and all kinds of other stuff that you can, use to market that game and whatnot. So,
and it just makes a lot of sense. I think with the Big Ten kind of backing off UNC and taking a backseat to what the SEC wants to do, it seems pretty apparent that the SEC kind of wants to move into that state of North Carolina, into that footprint. ESPN wanting to retain that big brand. And then when you look at the football side, to match up those big classic brands that maybe they haven't had a lot of football success lately, but still, the branding for that, the marketing, there's a ton of stuff you can do with it.
For sure, yep. All right, let's get to game 4, matchup 4.
Yeah. So this one, honestly, I think this would be probably our best game so far, actually, on the football field. I have the Oregon Ducks matching up with Texas. One of the new power team that came into the Big Ten with the new power team that came into the SEC.
Yep.
Both teams, I mean, they got money coming out their ears. They're huge college football brands, ton of success on the field. I think this is just a great matchup. I haven't really seen these teams play each other much over the years.
Yeah.
So this would be one. Let's just set up a great football matchup. People get excited. And again, this is year one, and my vision of this would be a 2-year home and home for most of these series.
Right, okay.
So let's say the first year, Texas traveling to Autzen Stadium. I mean, imagine that, the atmosphere there. And then the next year to reciprocate that with Oregon coming down and playing in Austin. Just amazing atmosphere. Two just powerhouse programs.
Yeah, I mean, given where these two teams have been here recently and going into next year, everybody expects them to be at the top of the mountain here again. And yeah, I mean, that would be just a crazy matchup to have this here very early in the season. Sometimes you kind of, I don't want to say luck into them, they schedule them, but you're scheduling these things 4 or 5 years out. You don't exactly know, what the teams are going to be like. Yeah, your big power programs. But man, if you could lock something like this up, two teams that are in the top 4 or 5 of the entire country early in the season, you'd get a ton of eyeballs on that game.
Agreed.
Okay, who we got next?
And I will say one further point to that is it adds, because the SEC has such a footprint in the southeastern, the Eastern time zone.
Right.
That adds some opportunity if you're going to do this over a weekend for some later time slots.
Good point. Yep. Yeah, that would be your late night headliner.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't gotten through all the games yet, but I would assume that's your late night headliner.
Saturday night, 8 o'clock, Labor Day weekend,
Yeah.
Texas Longhorns traveling to Autzen Stadium.
Right.
I think that would draw some eyeballs.
I'm pretty sure. Yes. All right, let's go on here. What do we got next, Steve?
Okay, so the next game, people may think a little strange. I think this is a cool, fun matchup. I've got the Washington Huskies and the Georgia Bulldogs.
Okay.
Again, two teams that have not historically played each other, different parts of the country. You can't get much farther apart than, Georgia and the state of Washington. Washington, they were just in the national championship game a couple years ago. Georgia has continued to have that success on the field ever since Kirby Smart got there. They're, one of the top 2 teams in the country every year. And we've seen Georgia play Ohio State in the playoffs. We've seen them play Michigan, I believe.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen this matchup. And also, it may sound a little silly, but the whole mascot thing, the Washington Huskies, Georgia Bulldogs, I think you could get a lot of marketing out of that.
Yeah.
The fan base would have fun. And, out there where the Washington Huskies play, I forget the name of their stadium, beautiful atmosphere. I think it would be awesome.
It's a beautiful stadium there.
Beautiful stadium. Beautiful atmosphere. It'd be great to see a powerhouse.
Isn't it Husky Stadium?
It might be just Husky Stadium, yeah. To see a SEC powerhouse travel across the country and play out there, I think would be a lot of fun. And hopefully, you'd hope that Washington Huskies are back on track as one of those, power teams again by then after their little rebuild.
Sure.
But again, a fun matchup.
Yep.
2 great locations. And I think there's a lot of marketing that could go into that.
I agree. The first thing I thought was Huskies versus Bulldogs, which, it's a mascot thing.
Yeah, still cool.
Thing, but still cool. And yeah, you mentioned it, Southeast, Pacific Northwest, you don't get too far, unless you're taking a Florida team, you're not going to get any further apart in the country. And assuming we get Washington, they lost a lot, 2 years ago or a year ago. Including their coach. And, they'll get it right back up. That's a great program, and they brought in a great coach. Yep. So I think that's a really intriguing game for sure. Most of these will be. I mean, we're talking about the power teams in the country here. So, all right, where are we headed to?
Okay, so this next matchup, I wanted to match up 2 teams that have amazing home field experiences. This is another candidate that could be a nighttime game. If you're talking a whole weekend, a Friday night, a Saturday night, a Sunday night game, whatever. But the Hawkeyes of Iowa and LSU Tigers, again, whether LSU is coming up to play in Kinnick Stadium, which is a smaller stadium than what LSU plays in, but it's so tight, the confines, the wall is like 10 feet behind the sideline. It's crazy there. It's very loud. Crazy things happen at night. And then at LSU, their stadium, huge SEC stadium, super loud crowd. They're known as being basically the loudest crowd. Great atmosphere. So either way, either stadium from year to year, it would be great atmosphere, and 2 just kind of classic historical brands from each conference.
Right.
I think this would be a great matchup. Great marketing, and again, a great nighttime atmosphere. So we're talking about Saturday night, down in the Bayou in LSU or up in Kinnick Stadium in Iowa, Labor Day weekend, I think would be just awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really interesting matchup. 2 great fan bases, Think you'll draw a lot of eyeballs again. And yeah, I like what you're doing there with that matchup. Again, doing that home and home. I think a lot of these would be important to be able to get that, back to back home and home type of deal, year 1, year 2. So, okie doke.
Okay, so the next matchup, and we're going to have some more of these. This next one, we're getting into like the middle teams of the Big Ten versus the middle of the SEC.
Yeah.
So I have Minnesota and Auburn matched up.
Okay.
Auburn is a program. I mean, they've had historical success, but the last few years it's been a little difficult with them. They've gone through some coaching changes.
Yeah.
Minnesota has had some success, but just kind of middle of the pack.
Yep.
But both good schools. They put a lot of effort into their football programs. And I wanted to kind of give them each maybe a little easier path. Auburn is already playing Alabama every year, and Georgia every year, and seems like Florida every year, and Tennessee every year. So match them up with a team that's going to take this seriously. It could be a good, fun atmosphere, but isn't necessarily maybe the top 2 or 3 team in the Big Ten.
Right.
So we're not making, piling on them with a hard schedule. But Minnesota and Auburn, I think this could be fun. Good atmospheres. I think another chance for like a later night game. For each of these, and just a good matchup, kind of a middle of the road team from each conference.
Yeah, I agree. That's what the first thing I thought of. Like 2 teams that you kind of you've been wanting a little more out of them over the last several years, and I think again, trying to not only get matchups that whether it's traditional like history, like we started with. Or just matchups where we're going to get a good game.
Yes.
You're not going to take a Georgia versus a Northwestern, for an example. And just again, 2 programs that seem kind of similar here over the last few years in terms of just trying to get their footing again. And I don't know if they will or won't, but I think it's a very even matchup here, given to where the 2 programs are. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, so next one up.
Okay, so this one again, kind of like the LSU and Iowa matchup. Wisconsin and Ole Miss. You got Camp Randall Stadium in Madison, and Ole Miss. They got, just the whole atmosphere. I think they call it the Grove there. It's just beautiful, wonderful atmosphere at both places.
Yep.
They take their college football seriously, even in the years like neither one of these programs have to be 11-1 and challenging for a national championship for the other to take the program seriously. A lot of history, both really good locations for games. Would make great TV, great marketing. I just think this would be a fun matchup. Wisconsin, Ole Miss, and trading 2 years of a home and home at both of those locations.
And Ole Miss, they're right on the edge. Easily could have potentially been in the 12-team playoff this year. They had a couple games just not go their way, and they were just out of it.
Yep.
I think they're right there again. And Wisconsin, one of those teams where you think they're going to be there, and again, they have some of those hiccups. So 2 teams, definitely towards the upper portion of not top 2 or 3. I don't know, Ole Miss might be pretty darn close, but I like that matchup. Again, trying to make sure we're matching up teams that we're probably going to have a pretty competitive game here, and both take it. I don't want to say seriously, but they're both going in thinking they're going to win the game, or they're needing to win the game.
It doesn't make sense to match up like a Northwestern with a Georgia or Alabama.
Right. Yeah, that does nothing.
Yeah. So our next matchup, kind of similar, Illinois and Kentucky.
Yeah.
Illinois, really good season this last year. I think they're primed for another good season, but in general, they're usually a middle of the pack Big Ten team.
Sure.
Same thing with Kentucky, although Kentucky's kind of had a couple down years. Maybe they're a little below the middle, but I think the geographic rivalry, Illinois, Kentucky, similar states,
right?
I think that'd be a good one where I think their fans, they could travel to each of them, unlike it'd be a little harder some of the coast to coast matchups we've seen. So I think that's just a good matchup. They could create some rivalry out of the geographic closeness.
Yes.
Similar programs, and just a fun matchup.
Agree. That's, again, first thing that came to mind was that geography's there. You can get a nice, if you keep it kind of going, a rivalry between the Illinois, Kentucky type of deal. And that was we've talked about these, like you said, these ones that are super far apart. This one maybe, trying to get that regionality, which we need to keep here in college football for sure. So, all right, where are we headed next, Steve?
Okay, so next we got the Nerd Bowl.
Oh my gosh.
Northwestern Wildcats versus the Vanderbilt Commodores.
Okay.
I believe is their mascot name. I mean, two schools that are just they each have their up years. There was years under Pat Fitzgerald where Northwestern, they went to the Rose Bowl, I think, a couple times.
Yeah.
They were in the Big Ten championship game. Vandy over in the SEC has struggled most years, but this last year they knocked off Alabama. They were a contender. But in general, both of these schools are known for being just high academic standards, but still investing a lot in their football programs. Northwestern building that new beautiful stadium
Yes.
right on Lake Michigan.
Yep.
Vanderbilt, their stadium in Nashville. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Nashville?
Right.
So basically, it's Chicago versus Nashville, two nerd schools from those two locations. Who have big followings and they get some eyeballs on TV. So I think again, marketing, you could build this as the Nerd Bowl or the high academic schools of each conference. And again, two great locations.
Yes.
That new beautiful stadium right along Lake Michigan, and again Nashville. I mean,
Right.
who wouldn't want to play in Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, two great cities. Nashville's awesome. I was able to visit there recently, and the perfect matchup. I mean, I haven't seen this. These are all new as we're going over these, but we've talked about Northwestern a couple times. Northwestern, Vanderbilt. To me, if you're going to do this scheduling agreement, they're the two that obviously, at least in year one here, would almost have to play each other.
Yep.
I mean, that's an easy one. At least I think it was. This
Totally
is your
agree.
list, but
Yep.
I think this was an easy one. Steve, we're halfway through. We're 10 down. We're
Yeah.
10 to go. We're turning the corner.
We still got some big schools we have not talked about.
I am waiting. Who do we got next?
Okay, so we're still kind of in the middle of the pack here.
Okay.
We got Purdue, we got Mizzou. Missouri, a lot of people were expecting big things from them this last year.
I was one of them.
Me too. They didn't quite live up to that, and they've had up and down years. And Purdue definitely, the last 2 years, they've really struggled.
Yeah.
Before that, when they had Jeff Brom there, they were doing really well. They were in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah.
Honestly, this is just a middle of the pack matchup. This is probably going to be on the Big Ten Network or SEC Network. You got to match them up with something. I just thought this again. You had to match the teams up. Just kind of made sense. Purdue and Mizzou. Not much else I can say about
I was going to say, I mean, we can talk about some of these because they're going to be great matchups, and you got to match everybody up.
Yes.
And maybe this is one they just kind of fell to each other because they were kind of left. I don't want to say they were leftovers, but the other ones had much more natural types of
Yes.
matchups than maybe this one does. So
And also not burdening either one of these programs. Neither one of these programs needs to be playing a top program
Right.
at that level of difficulty. So.
right, okay, let's keep moving then.
This next one I think is really interesting. Basically, North versus South, the Yankees versus the Southerners, Michigan State and Mississippi State.
Okay.
Two historic programs that have really taken football seriously, but have been kind of on the down, on the down level. Have been knocked down a level the last few years. Have not been that great.
Yeah.
But I think they're evenly matched programs. I think they would both really enjoy this game. I think the fans would travel for this. Mississippi State fans coming up get a chance to come up to Michigan Labor Day weekend. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And vice versa, going down and playing there. This could be a night game on like Friday night maybe.
Sure.
Or you could even put this in Ford Field. They've done that with some of the Michigan State games.
Good point.
Especially that weekend, there's no NFL games
Right.
that weekend. Make it a destination type thing to go to Detroit.
Yeah.
Who knows? But I just thought this was a good, even matchup between similar teams.
Agree. Yeah, I think that'd be another matchup where you're kind of getting teams, again, ups and downs. Obviously, Michigan State, massive down here recently, but we think they've got a good coach in Jonathan
Yeah.
Smith. They're going to get that turned back around there in Michigan State. Historic program. I think overall that's another solid matchup. I think we're getting to some big boys, Steve. Where are we going?
This next one's going to knock some socks off.
Okay.
So for the Big Ten, we have one of the biggest brands of them all historically.
Yep.
University of Michigan, the Michigan Wolverines versus should be first surprise, well maybe second surprise from the
yes.
SEC.
Yep.
Clemson Tigers. I think just a great matchup. Clemson has been one of the, over the last 10, 15 years, has really established themselves as a big national brand.
Right.
Michigan is the historic national brand that's kind of had a return to prominence, by winning a national championship about a little over a year ago. Just a huge matchup. This could be a really anchor matchup. I could see this as like a big noon kickoff.
Yes.
Especially if it's in Clemson,
Yep.
Saturday morning in South Carolina.
Yep.
I just, huge matchup, huge brand, would draw a ton of numbers. And this is, when you think of a Big Ten and SEC, even though Clemson's not in the SEC yet, but these are the type of matchups they would be trying to create.
And you often think everybody wants the night games, and Penn State wants their whiteout.
Yeah.
I always think of Clemson as having the day games,
Right.
and they come running down that hill in the beautiful sunshine,
Yep.
South Carolina sunshine. But yeah, this would be a phenomenal game. Another, we talked about Texas, Oregon maybe being that highlight. End of the day game, 8 p.m. Eastern game, if you will. This one would be a phenomenal big noon kickoff on that weekend as well. I love it, and I think we're going to keep going with some big boys here, Steve.
Yeah, the next one again, really, this was an easy matchup. The two most iconic, probably the most iconic brands in college football, especially the last 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years.
You may upset some Michigan fans saying that, but keep going.
I mean, Ohio State and Alabama, just two fantastic winning programs. I mean, these are programs 1 and 1A over the last 10, 15 years. You don't get the way they've recruited, the way they've performed. This would be the big anchor matchup of the weekend. Drawing the eyeballs, setting the stage for all the other games of a Big Ten and SEC challenge. I for year 1 and 2, you got to go with this, and they're going to want to rotate these teams around. You want Ohio State matching up with all these different SEC teams. You want Bama matching up with a whole bunch of Big Ten teams. But for year 1, let's get out of the gate with a powerhouse. Ohio State versus Alabama.
Well, I'm replacing our big noon with this one because, like you said, wouldn't get any bigger right now with the names, with everything about these two organizations. And of course, Alabama doesn't have Saban anymore, but it's still Alabama. I mean, they're still, for a while, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt here. And this is my new big noon kickoff. I'm going to relegate the Michigan Clemson to the 3:00 kickoff. But that's nothing wrong with that either.
And imagine, so in Labor Day weekend, you could do that Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
That's true. Yeah, you could have big noon 3 straight days.
Yeah. Which takes me to our next matchup.
Okay.
And my Penn State fans will be pissed to hear I mention big noon kickoff and the same with them, because our fans do not like the big noon kickoff. So we will say maybe we won't do this big noon.
Okay.
But two historic brands: Penn State Nittany Lions, Tennessee Volunteers, the Vols. Again, two historic, awesome programs, had a lot of success, especially when we were younger. And they had some kind of down years, and both have basically returned to prominence. They're not at the top of their conferences, but boy, are they knocking on that door.
Absolutely.
They're chomping at the heels. And this matchup just is great. And imagine, a nighttime matchup, because I'm not going to say big noon, okay? Let's say a nighttime matchup, whiteout, Labor Day weekend, Penn State hosting Tennessee, or the opposite. Tennessee, they have that beautiful, they do the checkerboard, playing Rocky Top. Peyton Manning will be there singing and dancing to Rocky Top, and the Nittany Lions come in. I mean, just a great matchup either way, and a great way to start. And again, these are two programs, you're going to want to mix them and match them in other years, but for year 1 to get out of the gate, just a great classic matchup.
Well, you are cooking on all cylinders, because you went from Michigan, Clemson, you did Ohio State, Bama, now you got Tennessee, Penn State. I mean, all three of these matchups are phenomenal. I'm with you. Where these two, especially Penn State and Tennessee, knocking on that door, about ready to bust the door down. We'll see which one can do it first, if either one. But man, they are both right there, and I'm anxious for them. And if you had this game next year, my gosh, holy crap, so.
Well, JY, I got bad news.
You're going to let me down.
We can only go down from there. And boy, are we going down.
Okie dokie.
So our next matchup, this is like the Nerd Bowl 2, or the kind of the fake Nerd Bowl.
Okay.
We got Rutgers from the Big Ten. Versus I have Duke in the SEC.
Okay. Number 3 that you're adding here.
Number 3. Obviously both fine academic institutions. Neither school's had a ton of success on the field.
Right.
Although under Greg Schiano, Rutgers has gotten better.
Yes.
Last year they hit the over on their wins. We made some money on that,
Yep.
and hopefully our dwellers made some money on that. And Duke under Manny Diaz, they had a good, respectable season.
Yep.
And before that, I forget the other coach that he went to Texas A&M. They had a good season under him. I think Mike Elko.
Yeah.
So both programs, not a lot of Rutgers had a lot of historical success 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But over the last 10, 15 years, not a lot of success, but are coming back.
Yeah.
I just thought this was a simple, easy matchup. And again, this could be another Big Ten Network game or SEC Network game.
Yeah.
The 1 o'clock game, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock game, whatever. Good matchup for both programs. It doesn't put too much pressure to get a big win versus a hard team. Just evenly matched programs that similar academic standards, trying to do the same things. Just made sense to match these two.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of use this similarly as kind of like the Michigan Auburn game, trying to get teams that match up. We think you're going to match up fairly well. You did Michigan Auburn, of course. We talked Northwestern Vanderbilt, kind of in that same vein. I think this is very similar here. And you're right, it's going to be on the Big Ten Network. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a big noon type of game. And, you need every kind. So, all right, what do we have? 3 left.
Yeah, well, I said we got 3 days, Labor Day weekend.
We do.
We need 3 stinkers. So my third stinker here is Maryland and North Carolina State.
Oh, my.
So another surprise there. North Carolina State. I have North Carolina State joining the SEC as a partner, coming along with UNC.
Okay.
Maryland is just Maryland. They're generally bottom half of the Big Ten. They did have some okay years. I think they went 8-4 a couple years ago. And NC State, they just are what they are. Even in the ACC the last 2 years, I really thought they were going to do better last year. You didn't, and you were right. They didn't do very well. If they get an invite to the SEC, it's mostly going to be because they're coming along with North Carolina and UNC, and they do add, they're a bigger program if you want to get into that state, North Carolina. They have had historic basketball success, although this year not so much.
Right.
But I think they were just in the Final Four a couple years ago. Yeah. So they add something to the conference for basketball, help you get into that state, and they're going to be. They were a middle of the road team in the ACC. They're going to be a bottom half team in the SEC. So this matchup just makes sense. There is a little bit of geographic. Maryland used to be in the ACC. They're not too far away from each other. I think they had a pretty good basketball rivalry for a while. Yeah. So it's just one of those, you got to pair those two teams up and they get stuck together.
Regionalities there for sure. Maybe some history with, the old ACC connection and all that. And absolutely NC State riding the coattails of UNC. We've talked about that before. I don't have much more to add to that. So let's get to the next game.
So we got 2 more games here.
Well, you've added all 4 to the SEC. So now we got to wait. Now we got 2 SEC teams waiting on partners who are going to be new Big Ten members. So who we going with?
Yeah. So these last 2, these are kind of bangers here, I think. So we have for the Big Ten in our next to last game, the University of Miami versus Texas A&M.
Okay.
Again, just kind of 2 historically good teams. A lot of history and tradition. I think I remember them playing each other somewhat back in the 80s or whatever. They just played each other, I think, last year. I think, again, they're just kind of similar programs. They're not the top program in their own state, but they're good, solid historic programs with historic success in the states of Florida and Texas, which are, the 2 key states for college football.
Sure.
They're similar programs. They're trying to do the same things. I think, good fan bases that are going to watch the games at least. You're going to get eyeballs. I think this is just a good, solid matchup. Of 2, again, similar teams.
Agree. I think this is a great matchup. I think this is an easy 3 o'clock game on one of those days. You're going to get good viewership out of Texas and out of Florida here. And I like the matchup. It's not going to be your marquee matchups like we talked about. But I'll tell you what, it's a solid second tier there. No doubt about it. All right, our last one, Steve. We all know everybody's waiting on Florida. Who are you going to pair Florida with?
So here's the thing. This last one is kind of a cheat. I have in the Big Ten, I have Florida State and I have Florida representing the SEC. So that means the two teams, for those who are not been tracking along, it's just the last two games.
Right.
I have Miami and Florida State added to the Big Ten. The Big Ten really wants to get into the state of Florida.
Sure.
I think they're going to be, they kind of got freezed out in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah.
These are two teams that historically play each other anyways.
Right.
And I'll tell you, that's the big thing with Florida State moving to a conference. You know, both fan bases, they hate each other.
Yeah.
But they are committed somewhat like Ohio State and Michigan. Maybe not to that level.
Yeah.
But they are committed. They are going to play each other every year.
Yeah.
So that's why I said this is kind of a cheat. You bring Florida State in, just have them continue to play each other every year as part of this crossover. It's going to draw eyeballs.
Yeah.
They're committed to playing each other anyways. It's just a win-win, I think, for everybody.
Yes.
And just a natural matchup that I think makes sense.
Agree. The wonderful matchup, tons of eyeballs. Already have it for the most part, but now it gets that SEC Big Ten scheduling flavor, scheduling challenge flavor. And yeah, so you took six. You stole 6 teams from the ACC in order to do this. I mean, we've been talking about that for a while now, especially FSU. You've been talking about even before the lawsuits. You have been talking about how much the Big Ten is interested in the state of Florida and specifically Florida State University. That happened 18 months ago when we started our channel. Here in this, obviously, you're moving them to the Big Ten, and we'll have to wait and see now that that's all wrapped up. But you're stealing 6 teams out of the ACC for the 20-team challenge.
Yeah, and it's rough on the ACC, but honestly, I think most people can see this coming. It might not be the full 6.
Understand?
You know? They could limit the damage.
Yes.
But I think most people kind of see the writing on the wall. And we've already talked about the ACC. They're going, at least for now, they're going to continue to exist. They got their contract extended. I believe they already have targets lined up. We did an episode about that.
Yeah.
The most likely teams to leave the ACC and the most likely targets to come into the ACC. So if you're an ACC fan here and you're like, oh God, we're not going to have a conference, I think you will have a conference. And you should go back and find that episode where we talk about the teams that will be likely joining the ACC.
Well, I'm going to throw up a slide real quick of the entire Big Ten SEC challenge that Steve just went over. Here's the summary. All right, there's the summary of the Big Ten SEC Challenge. It may be closer than some people really realize. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Of course, we do everything Big Ten, Mountain West, and conference realignment. We like to do these types of things in the off season. Fun to talk about, it's fun to speculate about. Throw your comments down below. Let us know what you think. Hey, make sure you like this episode. Subscribe if you like our content. We'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.